Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my epic rant and review of the 2013 drama Blue is the Warmest Color. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to John for requesting this video. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. And I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Blue is the Warmest Color is a foreign drama that is based on a graphic novel of the same name by the author Jules Moreau. I've never read the graphic novel, but from what I've heard from a lot of people who are fans of the graphic novel, this isn't necessarily the best adaptation of the source material. It's very different, and there are some similarities, but there's a lot of aspects of this that are drastically different from the graphic novel. The graphic novel, though, has never really been something that's really been on my radar or something I'm really that interested in. Not necessarily because of the fact that it centers around two women who fall in love. It's just I'm not into that kind of graphic novel. Period. I'm not really into the real life graphic novels that are more like a soap opera in comic form. Like I'm not. That's not my thing. And I didn't care for this film. I really didn't. And what's what's disappointing about this movie is that despite my initial leeriness going into this film because of the running time and because of the fact that it's a foreign film and because it just seemed like a typical pretentious art house film that I would just not be a fan of. I was initially intrigued and I was initially hooked by the film after like the first 45 minutes to an hour. I was into it. I was into Adele's story and what's going on with her and her life as a teenager and her experimenting and her falling for this woman, Emma, and her going to a gay bar for the first time and dealing with her feelings and just that moment and just how different it was from other parts of her life at the time and the sweet and genuinely heartfelt connection that Adele ultimately built with Emma as they started to fall for one another. Um, I liked those moments. I liked the cold, hard reality of how Adele's friends treated her differently when they realized that she was spending time with a lesbian, and when they realized that she might be into girls. I like that it didn't sugarcoat things, and it showed the cold, hard reality of that, and how friends will turn on you, and so on and so forth. So that was something that I definitely was drawn to, as well as the visuals. It's a well shot film. There's some really gorgeous looking shots in this movie. It's got some good direction and cinematography. So initially, I was kind of pulled in. And it wasn't just because of the graphic sex scenes, because in all honesty, that was like the first moment that kind of took me out of the movie. This really long sex scene between Emma and Adele that just goes on forever to the point where it really did feel like exploitation. And at that point, the film definitely did start to lose my interest, which is crazy, right? Because, I'm a dude, I'm a guy, and there's boobs and there's pussy and there's all this other stuff and there's two women banging. And it's just something, though, that if I was watching a porn, that's one thing, but this isn't a porno. So it just felt exploitative and just kind of icky. And I would have felt that way if it was an extended long sequence between a man and a woman doing the same thing. So it's not just because of the fact that it's two women doing it. And that wasn't the first time. It just felt like the director just started using this as a crux and just trying to shock and just completely take the audience out of their comfort zone in a way that was not necessarily loving. It felt blunt, and it didn't seem like there was a lot of care there. And there wasn't a lot of care in the way those scenes were shot either. And there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that soon enough. And he just started becoming just too wrapped up in the sexuality and the sensual nature of the film, and started to really just put a lot of the other more compelling aspects of the story to the side. And for a film that's like 3 hours long, that really did affect how the film ultimately translated for me. It's one of those movies where just as it kept going, the more and more I started to not like the film. And by the time it was over, I did not care for it. And it's a shame. It had a good hook. It initially started well enough, and then it just lost it. It just went off course. Now the film is directed by this guy named um Abdellatif Kechiche. I probably butchered his name entirely. But if you ask me, he deserves it to be butchered because he's an emotionally manipulative and physically abusive director. And what do I mean by that? The two stars of this film, I'm just going to say Leia and Adele, because I don't want to butcher their last names. So Leia and Adele, they refused to work with this director ever again after their experiences working with him because he was so emotionally manipulative, abusive, and also physically abusive when it comes to the production of this film. The graphic sex scene, the extended sex scene between Adele and Leia, that was the first sequence that they shot for this film. They were not aware of that ahead of time. It was just one of those spur of the moment. The director just throws it at them. And on top of that, he shot numerous different shots of that sequence to the point where it was just pure excess and unnecessary. And hours upon hours of these women doing these acts and exposing themselves in such a way. And he was completely unaware or did not listen to any of their protests or at anything that they had to say when it comes to, hey, we think we got the shot, can we move on? And that just kept on going throughout the entire production, just this same cycle of just obsessive manipulative behavior from this director. Like he thought he was the next Stanley Kubrick. He thought it was acceptable for him to just commit such acts on the set of this film. And it just got so out of hand that that both women were like, yeah, never again, never working with this guy ever again. And you really can't blame them. And if that isn't bad enough, he had them learn the script, but then as the film began shooting, he was like, oh no, wait, forget the script, just improvise, do what your heart feels is the best for this scene. Just typical pretentious, lame bullshit from a director. Like, this guy probably thinks his farts don't stink because he's gotten so used to the smell of his farts because he has his head up his ass 24/7. You know, that kind of thing. And it's a shame because when you see this film, you see a director who, on a technical standpoint, is a good director, if not a great director. He's really good with visuals, really good with making colors pop, really good with making a certain setting um, feel or appear to be very striking to the eye. He's good at creating different, unique looking landscapes and perspectives. He's good at using different camera techniques and angles and so on to the advantage of the film visually. Like he's a genuinely good filmmaker when it comes to the technical aspect of directing and the other nuances of that. But when it comes to being a good person, not so much. So, yeah, it's one of those things where it's unfortunate. It really is because it's a well shot film, but I still can't get past his behavior and the poor working conditions on the set and so on. Now, it's also written by Abdellatif as well as Gali LaCroix, based on the graphic novel, like I said earlier. And this screenplay, it starts off well, establishing the character of Adele and her home life and what's going on at school and her conflict with who she is attracted to and the pressure of that and so on and so forth. Her initially dipping her toe into the realm of uh, lesbians and so on and so forth when she goes to the gay bar, the budding relationship that she has with Emma. All of that is relatively strong at the start of this story. There are some things that are red flags, like the sequences that are just excerpts from a philosophy class or a literature class. But, you know, there were still other things that I felt were compelling enough to still make it a narrative that was worth following. But then it just becomes so tedious and so repetitive and so incredibly pretentious that you just don't care. Your passion for the story and for the narrative, despite the fact that there are numerous scenes of passionate lovemaking in this movie between Emma and Adele, you do not have that same unbridled passion for the characters and the story going forward because it burns out. It burns away because of the fact that the writers didn't really maintain that momentum. After the first hour, then it just turns into a pretentious wank fest with numerous different sequences. They're just more excerpts from these classes. An excuse for the writer to showcase how much classic literature they know, and so many scenes that I know are meant to have subtext of people eating, but it just got so repetitive to the point where it was ridiculous and lost whatever meaning it might have had initially because they just kept beating you over the head with it. Yeah, I get it. You know, Adele is voracious and she has a really strong appetite and lust for life and for love. And that ties into her appetite for literal food. And it's just like, okay, you'll have one scene where she'll be eating spaghetti and then the next scene she's eating Emma out. Okay, I understand. I get it. I understand this. But this is repetitive and this is getting silly with so many spaghetti scenes or so many scenes of people just stuffing their face full of food or numerous scenes that are just completely pointless padding. There is no reason for this story to be 3 hours long. You cut out scenes that are completely useless, like party scenes that add nothing to the movie, or two or three of the eating scenes at least, or scenes that cut away to Adele working as a teacher at some school. None of those sequences really add anything into the movie and don't add much to the character development or the depth, other than the fact that, oh, she works as a teacher. It's like, okay, all right, fine. Is there anything more to that than just the fact that she works there? You don't need to show those scenes of her in the classroom teaching kids or reading a book to kids in the class. You could just have a line of dialogue where she talks about how she's working as a teacher to one of her friends at one of the parties that you have numerous instances of in this story. And you also have like dinner parties because hey, we'll combine the party aspect and the eating all in one. And the conversations are vapid and just boring stuff that I think the writers thought was really poignant and compelling, but it's the kind of stuff that you've heard a million times. Like, women have stronger orgasms than men. No shit. Never heard that before. And there was just a lot of that going on. And then you have the drama with Emma and Adele where it doesn't work out and there's a breakup, and then Adele decides to be with a man again, and then by the end of the movie she chooses to be friends or loose acquaintances with Emma because she goes to some art gallery, so some showing of Emma's work or one of Emma's friends' work. I don't remember exactly which because I didn't care at that point. And the end of the movie, the end of the story is Adele on her own, walking down the streets of I think this is a French film. So, she's walking down the streets of France or wherever this film is set in, and she's not necessarily sure of where her life will go from here. And it's the kind of stuff where it's like, you wasted 3 hours in my life for this typical kind of story about a coming of age. It's like, why? This did not need to be 3 hours. It was tedious, it was repetitive, and it just got to the point where I was annoyed by it. I was annoyed by the story and by the narrative and by the characters. Adele seems to just mope throughout the majority of the movie. Sorry, apparently I can't speak today. She mopes throughout the majority of the film and ends the film moping. It just seems like there really wasn't a lot of growth there, other than the fact that she experimented a little with women, but then realized, oh, it's not, I don't want to limit myself to that or something. And it just felt like this is so not a story that needs this excessive amount of detail and length to tell it. It's a kind of story you could tell in 30 minutes in an episode of some sitcom. It's not something that you need 3 hours to tell. And I think if it was shorter, if it was an hour and 40 something minutes, and you cut out a lot of the pretentious, useless subtext that gets praise from critics, but doesn't really add anything to the film other than the runtime and extending the runtime. But if you take out a lot of that stuff and you cut out a couple of the graphic sex scenes, kind of trim them down a little bit so it's not as exploitative, then I think you might have a sweet love story. That leads to something where, oh, it doesn't work out, and with Adele and Emma because they grow apart and so on and so forth. But there's still a sweetness there when it comes to when they first met, and then you tie into the the story, the moment where Adele shifts her attraction and finds a boy again, and or a boy for the first time that she actually does feel attracted to, and finds someone in her life that makes her feel valued and whole, as well as sexually pleasured, that kind of thing. And she could have, found another woman or found a way to reconcile with Emma, but I understand that's not what they were trying to go for, because they're trying to do a sort of, teenage sort of a drama here where, you know, they go through phases and so on and so forth as they grow and they learn. And all of that can be accomplished in less than 3 hours. Point blank. Now, the film features some legitimately good performances. The two leads, they are amazing. They are excellent. Leia and Adele. Like, the two of them are really good performers, really good actresses. Very challenging kind of film for them to tackle. Not just because of the subject matter, but because of, the production and everything that came with that. And I thought they handled it pretty well. And I thought they had good chemistry, and I really did like the scenes between the two of them. They definitely did have sparks, and that's what makes it even more frustrating that this film is ultimately just such an overlong, pretentious slog of a movie, because of the fact that, these two performers really do bring it. And it just sucks that they're just straddled with such a poor film. And you have some other people like Salim Kaichochi plays Samir, and Ireland Rekoing and Catherine Salih play Adele's father and mother. Benjamin Sisko plays this guy named Antoine. Alma Jodorowsky plays a character named Beatrice, and she is actually the granddaughter of Alejandro Jodorowsky, the infamous cult filmmaker. Um, but really, the main focus of the film is Leia and Adele, and they are definitely two of the brightest spots when it comes to Blue Is The Warmest Color. It features some nice looking cinematography as well by Sophie and Alfani. The editing by like 5 people. Um, I think it could have used some work, especially when it comes to certain scenes just dragging on a little bit too long. Some better editing would have made those scenes feel a little bit more condensed, or really help them flow better within the pacing of the movie. I mean, you got like Albertine Lastera, Camille Touboukis, Sophie Burnett, Kalia Lacroix, Jean Marie Lengel. Yeah, there's 5 different editors. You have that many editors, but the film is still 3 hours long, and the film still has these scenes that just drag on for what feels like forever and a day. Yeah, it's like 180 minutes. Way too long. This is one of the most slow-paced dramas I've ever seen in my entire life. It really got to the point where it was an endurance test for like the last hour and a half. And I gotta be honest, folks, I failed initially because I stopped the film because I was just falling asleep and nodding off. So I stopped it, and then I went back to it later and finished the rest of it. So yeah, it's just one of those movies where I understand what the filmmaker and the writer were trying to do with this film. They were trying to have a poignant, heartfelt uh, narrative that centered around two women who were learning things about themselves in more ways than one, and having it around the backdrop of, LGBTQ and so on and so forth, and what it's like for a young woman to be at that point in their life where they are trying to figure out who they are. And I get it, I understand, but there's just so many scenes that are just so extended and just tedious and tiresome and repetitive that it just makes everything feel hollow, despite the best efforts from everyone involved, and despite what they're trying to do with this film and with this narrative. It doesn't feel, by the end of the movie, I don't have this moment where the film connects with me right down to my soul like it does with other critics and like it did with other people. It it just leaves me very indifferent and just not really caring that much, because it does such a poor job maintaining a compelling narrative and compelling character arcs. This is a prime example of how you cannot take something that's so generic and so played out when it comes to a teen drama and extend it to way past its breaking point and just throw in change a few things and think that that's brilliant and visionary. You can't just take a typical teen drama and just, instead of it being a boy meets girl story, it's a girl meets girl story, and then throw in pretentious lines of dialogue about art and film and sex and sexuality and so on and so forth. Have some moments where you name drop some famous authors and have emotionally just powder keg scenes where people yell at each other and break down, and there's a breakup, and then there's a rebirth, and there's all this other stuff. You can't have all of that and call it a day and think that you have made something that is really that compelling as a whole, let alone the next masterpiece. If you're going to do something so typical and only do so little to change things and add so much window dressing to it all to try to cover up the fact that you didn't really do that much to change the appearance or the overall structure of things or the plot or the script, then maybe just don't do it at all. Like, it's just one of those things where I just don't really feel like this is a perspective, despite the fact that it's somewhat fresh and different with the lesbian coming of age thing versus the straight coming of age thing. If you're not going to do it in a way that doesn't feel like a waste of people's time and doesn't drag things out to the point of terminal tedium, then just don't even do it. Don't even adapt the graphic novel. Just let it exist as it is and tell another story. If you're going to do some sort of representation for, LGBTQ relationships, well, I think there are better ways to do it than what you see here, because it does feel exploitative when it comes to the sex scenes. It does feel like it's more of an instance where the sex scenes are there and it's rated NC-17, not necessarily to show the reality of things or how things are or the sensuality of lesbian sex, and more of just a shock tactic, a cheap shock. And that, to me, that does feel wrong in more ways than one. And then it's just, you have this sweet relationship, and then they break up, and then she goes with a goes and bees with a guy, and then the movie ends with her at this crossroads again, essentially back where she started at the beginning of the movie. And it's just like, really? So they didn't even commit. Why do you keep making these movies where you have a lesbian perspective, but you don't commit to it? They just wind up becoming bi by the end of the movie. And they play it safe. And they aren't committed to the lesbian nature of the story. And yeah, this is just another example of that, and it's unfortunate in that way too. So I just didn't care for the film. It wasn't for me. Did I hate it? Kinda. I kinda did, especially when it was just dragging for so long and for so much of the running time. Um, but I will say this: if it intrigues you, check it out. Check it out sometime, because what entices you or what interests you could be a lot different than what what I like or what I'm into. So it was worth a watch for the two lead girls, for some of the visuals, and to see a different perspective that I don't see a whole lot of when it comes to these teen dramas. But at the same time, it didn't live up to its full potential. It spent too much of its time just going around in a circle, or just moping, or just being overly pretentious and windy, and not just long-winded conversations, but moments where it is windy in another way, where it just feels like, it's blowing farts out of its ass right into your mouth, and you're supposed to just sit there and smell it for 3 hours. But anyway, thank you for watching my review and my thoughts on Blue Is The Warmest Color, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.